So we wanted to start by just introducing ourselves. My name is Becka Haines Rosenberg. I use she, her, they, them pronouns, and I'm a member of Alexandria Monthly Meeting and Baltimore Yearly Meeting. And I live in Alexandria, Virginia. Uh, I have been serving as a recording clerk in various settings for almost 20 years now, starting in the Young Adult Friends program of Baltimore Yearly Meeting, as well as in the Adult Young Friends program of FGC, as well as the interim meeting of Baltimore Yearly Meeting, which is sort of like the BYM equivalent of PYM's continuing sessions. And then for FGC as assistant recording clerk with my mom, and then as recording clerk for 6 years. So I've been around, and I hope that we have some good stuff to share with you, and I will let my mom introduce herself.
I'm she, her. I live in Arlington, Virginia, member of Alexandria Friends Meeting. We've been there for almost 25 years, which is the longest I've stayed anywhere since I was a child. I grew up in New York Yearly Meeting and then traveled around a lot. So I've had a wide experience of friends. My father was recording clerk for New York Yearly Meeting for many years. And I was so impressed by his ability to to record, partly because as a teenager, I was quite sure he never listened to me. But when he was in front of a body of friends, he was just able to somehow lift up what was happening and bring coherence out of conversations that were sometimes quite scattered. And I enormously admired his ability to focus on what was important in the middle of a friends meeting. So I think I grew up wanting to be a recording clerk, and I have served as a recording clerk on quite a few committees for Baltimore Yearly Meeting for 6 years, and then Friends General Conference for another expended period, part of it in company with my daughter, which was wonderful. That was the time when I learned to start taking minutes on the computer instead of in longhand, which was a major transition. But I found that it works very well. I enjoy recording enormously. And one of the reasons is that it requires me to actually listen to everything that's happening in the meeting instead of just sitting there and letting it roll past me. And that enriches the experience extraordinarily. If you want to know what's really going on in a business meeting, it helps to sit at the clerk's table and have to pay attention to what everyone is saying and feeling and expressing in their bodies. So we're going to start tonight by looking at how recording is a ministry. The recording clerk listens for how the spirit is moving within a body of friends, engaged in discernment, and puts it into words. One of the books that I found very helpful in speaking about recording is by William Watson. It was published by New England Yearly Meeting in 1996, and it's called Before Business Begins. And I'd like to quote briefly from what he wrote. Whatever the risks and however intangible the pursuit, the continuing search for unity is what makes the conduct of Friends business so uniquely coherent and effective. And that is why listening for the spirit that sustains this unity and striving to give it adequate expression is central to the task of the clerks. Everything else they do is subordinate. Those at the clerk's table are partners in the ministry. They're like traveling companions setting out on a journey together. And they need to care for each other, usually in silence. They need to hold each other in love and prayer, whatever that might mean. And also to hold the body in a spirit of worship. The more people in a business meeting who are holding that sense of being in the presence of the divine, the stronger the foundation of the meeting will be.
Russian Geography 2000. It has a short name, it's 2 letters, but it's 200 miles across Russia and the 7th largest.
My experience as a recording clerk, of course, I've been through many different kinds of meetings. Sometimes Quaker business meetings become very contentious. But sometimes there is a palpable feeling of spirit moving in the room, drawing friends together and bringing them into one heart. It's something beyond what words can describe. But when you feel that unity emerging, that sense that friends value their community with each other and love each other and listen to each other, it's got to be one of the high points of existence. How many of you have served as a clerk or recording clerk? How many here? And have you had that experience of real discernment happening in a body of friends? Would anyone like to speak briefly to what that feels like? I think that's Alice Maxfield.
Hi, nice to see you, Deborah. I remember in 1967, PYM was meeting in March and trying to decide whether to support an anti-Vietnam parade that was somehow supporting North Hanoi or something like that. I don't remember the details, but I was in awe of the clerk and the recording clerks who, and there must have been 400 people in Art Street at that meeting, who continued to work with people as they expressed their concerns and so forth. And it was my first real introduction. I mean, I'd never been to business meeting before, and I was absolutely in awe at the recording clerks who were able to literally turn around and read a minute or read their minutes from the previous 20 minutes of discussion. And I've carried that with me for almost 60 years.
That's an important point. When the minutes are read back in the face of the meeting, during the meeting at which the discernment is going on, it's so fresh, and the immediate experience is very different from hearing minutes a month later about something that happened in the past. And William Watson has something to say about that I will share. It may seem presumptuous to think of most minutes as a form of ministry, but friends know that there are occasions when the conduct of our business achieves a heightened sense of purpose and commitment that grows out of a combining spirit that no one of us could claim as his or her work alone, or could have fully expected before it was experienced. A minute that can express this achievement needs to be heard and reflected upon not later, but at the moment it is achieved. I think most of our yearly meetings do read the minutes in the face of the meeting, but it's a practice that's not always used at the monthly meeting level. And I think friends lose something when they don't have an affirmation of that experience just when it's happening. Well, I'm going to turn this over to Becka to talk about accountability.
So when we were planning this workshop and talking about what our themes were, I said that when I talk about recording, what I always say is recording is a tool of accountability and what we're accountable to. And my mom said, "Do you mean accountable for?" And I said, "Both." And I think there are a couple of really important pieces when we talk about accountability. There's a very practical aspect, and then there's a very spiritual aspect of how we treat each other in a space of decision making. So I want to start with the kind of practical aspect, which is that when we think about what needs to go into the minutes, one of the most important ways to think about what goes into the minutes is what do we need to have in the minutes so that we can look back on them and know what happened and what we plan to do next. And the minutes may be recording a statement of what we believe. They may be, but they're often just recording what we said we'd do and what we said was important for us to do. And if it's important, the minutes will include what committee or individual will take the next steps on this thing that we think is important, what specifically they are being asked to do, and when they will report back. And often also what format they will report back in. Will there be a written report from a committee that's been charged to do something? Will a working group bring a presentation at a future session? We have these long-term relationships in our meetings and in our yearly meetings that we shepherd by writing down the specifics of what we're going to do next and being accountable for that. And I think that's one of the things that is very easy to get lost when we're tired, in particular. If we've been in business meeting talking about something really complicated for a long time, and sometimes we get to the point of like, here is a minute that faithfully describes what we thought about this thing, this really thorny issue that we were sort of working through, but our actions in that situation are often what matter most. And so we need to say, this was really important. We talked about it for a long time. And there's a spiritual piece of accountability in how we write down we talked about it for a long time. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that next. But what did we say that we're going to do? Because if we don't write it down, we may forget that we said we were going to do it. And the people who look at the minutes 50 years from now are not going to know that we said that we assigned some people to do something and to come back to the next meeting. And those people may not remember at the next meeting that they were assigned to do something and asked to come back. And one of the things that I think people say when you're a recording clerk, and maybe some of you have had this experience, is, does anybody actually look at the minutes? And you should. You should. If you're using minutes as a tool, looking back on them is going to be a great reminder of how much work we did. And my mom's going to talk a little bit more about that aspect of it later. But I do want to share a little bit about the kind of spiritual accountability that we have to each other in the body and in the community of a monthly meeting or a yearly meeting or committee. Because our minutes are also preserving a record of concerns that were raised in the course of discernment that will require future attention, and that may be formal attention in another session. It may be it may just be something that we need to keep in mind. So there's a little bit of an echo from somebody, I think. There we go. So some of the things that may come up in a meeting for which we need to be accountable are reservations that are expressed but not fully resolved, concerns that we can't take on today, but that we want to take on later. And that's another place where it's important to be able to say, at our next meeting, this will be an agenda item, for example. Spoken ministry that expresses a sense of the meeting, or spoken ministry from those who are often silenced or overlooked. And that's a really hard one. It can be very challenging if you hear something uncomfortable in a meeting as the recording clerk to say, that needs to be written down. That's part of our discernment. But often that is part of our discernment. That's part of what we have to kind of chew on to get to the right answer, and an answer that serves our testimonies, serves our sense of justice. One of the things that I think about when I think about minutes as a tool of accountability is that there's a real opportunity for anti-racist and anti-oppressive practice in what we say we're going to do and doing it and writing down how we did it. And that's something that we as bodies of friends can do. And one of the things that I turn to as a resource when I'm thinking about clerking or recording often is Tema Okun's Characteristics of White Supremacy Culture, which is an essay and then a website that some of you may have encountered in other places in Quaker circles. But there's a quote from the website that I often share as my favorite quote about business meeting that isn't actually about business meeting, which is, assume that everybody has a good reason for what they are feeling, and your job is to understand that reason and how it connects to their position, particularly if you are the one with more formal or informal power. And when you're in the position of clerking or recording in a meeting, you are in a position of formal power. And I think that that's like the way that we understand power and our levels of comfort around power are pretty variable, and we don't want to think of our clerks as leaders to be obeyed, because that is certainly not the way it should be. But there is power that comes with sitting at the clerk's table. There's power that comes with recognizing people, and there's power that comes with what is highlighted in our minutes that was brought up in the conversation, that like in the process of discernment, that may have challenged us, may have been hard for us to sit with. Has anybody had an experience of that, of getting kind of brought up short in business meeting and knowing that there was something that you needed to sit with a little bit more? You know, that can be a hard one to talk about.
I just feel like there's oftentimes, especially these days, where people just want to get to an answer, and especially when it's difficult, and we've had some challenging times over COVID, and sometimes we just try to find something that will appease everybody for today, as opposed to a long-term solution, and um, and it's a hard balance because sometimes you want to get to what you're going to be doing next week. Um, but at the same time, it may not be the fullest expression of the spirit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there's a real tension there because we want to be respectful of how much time we have together, often in circumstances where we don't have a lot of time together. And we also want to give enough space for everything that needs to come up to come up. And I think all of us who have been in meeting for worship know that sometimes it takes a while for a message to rise to the point of being shared. And sometimes you try really hard not to share something and you feel that push that you have to. And those are the kind of messages that we need to listen for in business meeting as well. One of the things that we noted when my mom and I were talking about accountability in the context of this workshop is that we sometimes record people as standing aside from a decision. And that may be one of the rare instances where we record the name of someone in the minutes who is not the person like giving a report or something like that. And that's not a practice everywhere. And it's also something to be very cognizant of when we think about how our minutes reflect on us and on our discernment, because there have been times, I think, particularly in my experience as a recording clerk and just as a person who attends business meetings, there have been times where you realize that one person says that they want to stand aside. They don't want to stand in the way of the decision, but they want to stand aside. And then another person does it. And then a third person does it. And you start to realize that there's something moving in the room that hasn't been effectively captured in the discernment and in the decision and in the minutes sometimes. Sometimes just the recording of what we did is what isn't adequate to the moment. And so it's another thing to listen for is, are there several people who have said that they want to be recorded as standing aside? Is there anything that they need to share? Is there anything that our minutes need to reflect about those concerns? I think when we treat accountability as a shared responsibility in recording what has happened in our meetings, we come into a deeper sense of trust and community with each other. And that isn't always easy. It can sometimes be pretty painful. But knowing each other deeply is worthwhile, and listening to each other deeply is worthwhile. And we're going to talk a little bit more about community, but I wanted to share a poem and some commentary about the poem that I ran into when I was planning for this workshop that just really reflected some of the things that I had been thinking about accountability and how we move together as a body. So this poem is called Shoulders, and it's by Naomi Shihab Nye. A man crosses the street in rain, stepping gently, looking 2 times north and south, because his son is asleep on his shoulder. No car must splash him, no car drive too near to his shadow. This man carries the world's most sensitive cargo, but he's not marked. Nowhere does his jacket say fragile, handle with care. His ear fills up with breathing. He hears the hum of a boy's dream, deep inside him. We're not going to be able to live in this world if we're not willing to do what he's doing with one another. The road will always be wide. The rain will never stop falling. And I read that poem in the context of commentary by Devin Kelly, who's a poet from New York City, that just like, he writes a newsletter where he just comments on poetry, and I highly recommend it. And I will put the link in our document that we're going to share at the end. But his commentary on that was, I am struck by the way the father in Nye's poem needs no sign to remind the passers-by that he is fragile, as they are, as is his child, as we all are. We have to remember that fragility, that feeling. We have to remember what it felt like to be broken or near broken, to be angry, to be full of care. We have to remember the weight of whatever it is we once held and how it felt pressed against us. Maybe the warmth, too. We have to remember the warmth. We have to remember what it felt like to carry something and how, in paying attention to the weight of it, we might have forgotten to think about our feet, and we might have stumbled or almost stumbled. We have to remember that because upon seeing someone else carrying something or someone, we will know that they might fall, and so we will be there because we remembered what it was like to catch them when they do. And that's what I hope that we're all doing when we're in business meeting together and in Quaker spaces together, is remembering what it was like to feel really vulnerable and to feel that sense of needing to share something that was hard when maybe we have to listen to something that's hard. And now I'm going to turn it back over to my mom to talk to us a little bit more about recording in community. And you are muted.
Sorry about that. Recording can be a way of building and strengthening our community with each other. Minutes can strengthen a body of friends by affirming the value of what we have accomplished in a meeting for business. It seems to me that minutes should try to capture what corporate discernment feels like, to give insights into the fact that we were in worship together. We listened to each other deeply. We cared about each other. We appreciated the silence that surrounded our speaking. What it feels like to be in a meeting for discernment. We need to include in the minutes any instances of unity or love or joy that we encountered in the course of the meeting. Like when we receive an application for membership, we receive it joyfully. When we hear a report on something that has been accomplished, we receive it with appreciation for all the hard work that went into it. And noting that in the minutes that we felt that way is very affirming to both the individuals who are bringing the reports or the requests for membership, and also to the body that simply was there to receive them and welcome them. Also, I'd like to include in minutes things that are simply fun, something that made us laugh. We don't have to be sober all the time. We don't have to be serious all the time. sometimes there's just something that lifts our hearts for a moment because it's funny, or we shared it with a sense of childlike pleasure. Our minutes need to affirm our diversity and our inclusiveness. They need to be welcoming. And I think I had to learn as a recording clerk not to put more weight on what was said by weighty friends. I think when I started out recording, well, I was a younger person then, I sort of assumed that the weighty friends, the friends who did the committee work and were always visible and active, were the ones who knew most about what we were meant to do as a body. And over the last, I don't know how many years, I've discovered that what we're meant to do as a body often comes out of left field. It's completely unexpected, and it's often brought to us by people who have a fresh perspective, who are newer to our community, who aren't so set in the way that we do things. And I've come to feel that it's more important to give a little extra weight to those contributions, the voices of people who don't speak very often, or who don't carry a lot of weight in the meeting, or who have a different perspective. It's that newness, that challenge that's going to move us into the future. And in taking minutes and in giving emphasis to that, I think we can refresh and build our community toward the future. Recording clerks don't have any visible authority, but we do have power. We propose the words that explain what we did and what we felt and what we believe. They're not exactly our words, we're offering them to the community. But we can pay attention to lifting up the voices of those who bring fresh light. It seems to me that a good set of minutes will always leave friends feeling that they did good work together, that they accomplished something, that their time was spent well, to good purpose. Sometimes it's very hard to frame a minute because the body really hasn't become clear about what it wants to do. It hasn't actually achieved unity about something. There may be a sort of a vague statement that this is where we are, this is what we believe. But when a recording clerk is trying to put it into precise language, there aren't words that seem to capture it, or there's some confusion about just what we meant. And in cases like that, it's important to acknowledge that I'm confused. I don't know what we've decided here, and go back to the body saying, we may not have, well, at least I don't understand what I'm writing here. And my first response, of course, is to think it must be my fault that I haven't gotten it. But going back to the body and saying, look, this is what I have. I don't feel it's adequate, or I don't know how to explain this piece of it. Gives everybody an opportunity to reflect again on just what it is we mean and what the implications are. And I've got another quote from my Watson book. In short, the meeting may have decided that it has reached a sense of the meeting when on reflection it really hasn't. At moments like this, the best service we could render the meeting is to admit our confusion and to ask for its help in framing another minute. The admission of confusion may crystallize for others their own misgivings and provoke further reflection and discussion. This experience, which I have had more than once, only reinforces my conviction that it is the meeting and not the recording clerk that writes the minutes. For when the meeting is unclear about its own sense, it is extremely difficult to frame an adequate minute. It is, after all, the meeting that finally creates the minute. The recording clerk should certainly not hesitate to ask the meeting for its assistance whenever it seems appropriate. The idea that the minutes belong to the body, not the recording clerk, has a lot of repercussions. And Becca's going to talk a little more about that.
One thing that can happen in a business meeting is that always the clerk should ask, are there corrections or other things that need to be shared for these minutes before asking for approval? And sometimes someone will offer a correction. And as the recording clerk, the best thing that you can do is to accommodate that cheerfully and gratefully. You may want to reread the minute in question, particularly on Zoom, where there can be all sorts of audio problems, if you think that it already addresses the issue being raised, but don't defend your minute against correction. The minutes belong to all of us in the body. And one of the things that is so helpful to do from the clerk's table is to model taking correction gracefully, because it helps everyone know that they can do it, that if somebody corrects them, that's a moment to stop and think, oh, maybe I needed that correction. Maybe I need to go in a slightly different direction, rather than getting defensive, because people getting defensive is one of the things that can really undermine our ability to do business together in community. And so welcome corrections, welcome feedback about your minutes. As we're sort of finishing up our prepared content here, but one of the things that's really important to know about being a recording clerk is that you can get better at it forever. You don't stop learning new skills and learning new ways of thinking about things and learning neat little phrases that will help you better express what happened in the body. And every meeting for worship is an opportunity for transformation, and every meeting for worship with attention to business is an opportunity for transformation. And I would invite you all to welcome that when you're serving as recording clerks in whatever capacity you may do that. I think that's about all we wanted to say. Do you have any closing remarks?
Well, I think we would be glad to answer questions. We were planning to introduce this session by having everybody introduce themselves, and then
That's when we thought there would be like 10 of you.
but we're very grateful that we have 29 people online now, and too many for individual introductions. So we would love to hear what your particular questions or issues are, what you're confused about, or something that you came up against that you couldn't resolve. So who has any sort of question? The best approach would be to raise your hand, since that will attract our attention.
Either your Zoom hand or your physical hand if you are on video. Emily?
So I'm wondering, are there things you do before recording that are good rituals or good practices to be prepared? Is there a to-do list, I guess?
One thing that I always do is work with the clerks to make sure that there's a written agenda in advance, and then break down the agenda into the individual action items. I know recording for FGC and recording for my yearly meeting, there was a very specific numbering system that went for the entire year, even though you were recording at multiple meetings across the year. So I would, as best I was able, put in the minute numbers in advance, as well as putting in the agenda items. And if I knew who was presenting an item, I would make sure that I had their name and that I knew how to spell it correctly and that I knew how to pronounce it correctly. Because I think that's there. And I think one of the things that I will sometimes do is just look at an agenda and look at the list of presenters and just kind of hold them all in the light in advance of business meeting and think about that connection that we all have as a body. Particularly if I know that somebody's like presenting an item of business that might be really hard. But that's a little bit of the practical of that, and also the spiritual.
Also, on a practical level, the more you know about what is going on and what has happened in the past and what is proposed for the future, the easier it is to take minutes. So one thing I always do, I'm Baltimore yearly meeting, interim meeting, which is like your continuing sessions, I think, a recording clerk now, and I just read all the reports with attention so that I will know what people are talking about when they come forward, and also the last session's minutes. That's It's easy to forget what happened 3 months ago or however long it's been, and um, I think about what the problems are likely to be. Is this likely to cause controversy? Is there somebody who's likely to be upset by this? Um, the more I know about the yearly meeting and the people in the yearly meeting and what the yearly meeting has done in the past, the easier it is for me to understand, and therefore to minute successfully what we're deciding at any given meeting.
That's a really good point about reading the minutes of the previous meeting and having them to hand, because it's very useful that someone does. And when we believe in minutes as a tool of accountability as recording clerks, we will use them as a tool of accountability. And if somebody says, I think we decided, go find the minute in the minutes of the last meeting and let the clerk know that you have found the minutes, that you have found the specific minute that's being referenced from the minute of last meeting. So having those things to hand is very useful.
I might add that knowing what's going on in the yearly meeting, like the process of recording, is a lifelong endeavor. But you have to start somewhere. So if you're new, jump in and get started. Start collecting that sense of where the meeting is and what its history is and what it cares about and who's in it, how they feel.
I think I see a hand from Christopher.
Yes. Can you hear me? Okay. I would like to have some advice on condensing minutes so that they're not overly wordy and that you're getting at the heart of the matter, but not leaving important points out.
I would actually love if you answered this specifically because watching you do it longhand and cross stuff out and do little arrows was such a like visual of the mental process that I think it takes to do that.
What I was actually going to say is that when reports and proposals are brought in writing, all you need to do is reference them, and if they're short, just embed them into the minutes, and if they're long, they can become attachments, but don't try to repeat what they say beyond what's necessary to explain what the situation is and what's being proposed. So that's a kind of just a practical way of cutting down on what you have to write for the minutes. But in terms of getting at the heart of what's going on, I mean that's the most challenging and enjoyable part of minute taking, and it's listening for the the phrases, the particular phrases that just seem to light up, to be powerful, and making sure that those words are in there, and not trying to explain everything that was said, but to look at the power that's drawing us together, the unity that is emerging out of whatever words are brought to the meeting. So mostly what I was doing when I was writing longhand was writing phrases and then kind of working them out into sentences. But I wanted to capture those particular words that just seem to have, they sort of light up, they've got some sort of truth or love behind them that means they should need to be preserved.
And I think that you can really see when that lighting up is happening. You can see that in the body of who, when you see a bunch of people go or start nodding really intensely, or like there's a reaction. There's a reaction in the room or in the Zoom room. It's a little bit harder on Zoom, but I think that you can still see when people are reacting when something has hit them in that particular way. The other advice that I would give is I think there's a tendency when you start doing that kind of note taking of, this was a phrase, this was something that was said that really lit up the room. You'll tend to write it down as a friend shared this, a friend said that. And I would urge you to not not do a lot of a friend said. One of the um there's a pamphlet that I think was put together by Friends in Strawberry Creek meeting in California about meeting for business. And one of the things that I think about, it's like 12 points about meeting for business, but one of them is when you leave the meeting, make sure that you say, we made this decision, not they made this decision, because you are acting as a whole body. And so when you're taking minutes and you're capturing those phrases, um, being able to say, friends shared concerns about this, and this. um, we were reminded that some people's experiences are like this. And, you know, like condensing those things is often leaving behind the attribution to a particular person, because what we're doing in our minutes is recording what the whole body heard as a body.
That's very helpful.
Other questions? Or like just cool stuff you've seen while you've been recording? Oh, I see a hand from Sarah.
I have it unmuted. Go ahead.
Mute.
Uh, Christy.
Do I sound normal?
Oh, no, now Sarah, you're unmuted. Sorry. Go ahead, Sarah.
Can you? Okay. Okay. I'm complete newbie on this. I'm balancing the ideas of getting the sense of the meeting accurately on paper versus like naming names sort of thing, and or what would the legal or insurance liability be for somebody's who's writing this all stuff down?
Can you say a little bit more about that concern? What kind of things that are there like specific items that you've heard come up in your meeting that you think might have liability or insurance
Yeah.
attachments?
There, there's been two things happening in our meeting, London Grove. We have security issues, and we're trying to balance being open and kind to strangers and not being, damaged by strangers. And we had a kindergarten at the meeting, so we're extra careful about things. But we don't want to be, crabby and particular about people coming to visit. And so we
were discussing that.
monthly meeting, this came up, and it's so real. This problem is just so real. And we're just a bunch of monthly meeting people, Is that good enough?
Yeah, that sounds like there's a really deep concern in the meeting. And it sounds like not a problem that the minutes can necessarily address effectively as the minutes of the whole meeting. And I wonder, what do I wonder? That's really hard.
Hey,
I'm,
Becca, I
yeah,
could narrow down my question a little bit
yeah.
because you got the background of my, situation. But I'm wondering about the person that's writing this down on paper. Does that person have more than more responsibility if there's a bigger problem that comes along later than the whole meeting as a body?
No, in terms of like I mean, I'm not qualified to give legal advice, but I would recommend against making criminal accusations in your minutes. Um, I think it's really important, especially if there are children involved, to make sure that you're following any reporting protocols that your state has about any potential harm to children. And also to have a meeting youth safety policy to address some of those things so that they don't have to be in your meeting's minutes because they're being addressed by an appropriate body that's not the whole monthly meeting. Um, I think
You're making me think because that's good. That the job of the recording clerk is to record everything that meeting decides and how they meant to get to that decision, how they arrived at that decision, and not, not name names that aren't in the room kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes it easier for me. Thank you.
Minutes rarely include names of individuals unless someone is giving a report or is assigned responsibility for some action or is applying for membership or getting married, or there's a particular reason why this individual either has responsibility or is making a request or making a report. In discussing situations within the meeting, we usually avoid mentioning names, and we try to I'm not sure what the right word for this. If there's something that's causing strong emotion, you can turn it into a query of sorts. Friends struggled with how to balance issues of safety and our desire to be welcoming to everyone. That kind of statement will catch the issue without naming names or particular situations, assuming that the hard work of actually dealing with the situations is being handled by somebody, by some committee, or by a caretaker, or according to a youth policy or a youth safety policy. Or, I mean, you need to actually deal with those situations, but you don't. What's in the minutes is just a recognition that you're trying to deal with them.
I see a hand from Emily.
So I'm wondering how much or how intrusive maybe the recording clerk is as a partner for the clerk. If the recording clerk hears something differently than the clerk, I'm just wondering what's the role that the recording clerk has in that situation? Should they stop and say, I heard something different, or do we understand the clerk as being the person who embodies the hearing of the meeting? And I really want to frame this in terms of partnership, I think, but trying to think what's appropriate.
I think my tendency is to defer to the clerk, and but as a partner, yes. And if there were something seriously wrong, um, I might intervene, but I can't recall ever having done that or having been faced with that necessity. There may be times when I think the clerk is, just a little off, but I will defer rather than stopping the flow. I don't know, Beck, how do you feel about that one?
Yes, and I think that if you can tell that the clerk is struggling, one of the best services that you can offer as a recording clerk is, lean over, tug on their sleeve, get their attention on whatever your teleconferencing service of choice is and say, I have a minute. Do you want me to test it? So offer what you have as the sense of the meeting, particularly if you hear the clerk struggling or you hear them kind of circling around a sense of the meeting but not articulating it clearly. I think it's really helpful to be able to do that. And if you're recording with a clerk that you haven't worked with before, set up what your signal is going to be, to do that. so that you're not surprising anyone. We used to like pass a lot of notes at the clerk's table at FGC, and that was the way that we did it there. But there are a lot of ways of making sure that you get the clerk's attention if you feel like they're struggling.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would, that friend speaks my mind. Yeah.
The next hand I see is Christy and Christy's cat.
Yes, Big Kitty also says hello. One of the things that you said that really struck me, I have a bunch of sentences highlighted. I'm going to stick with one of them. Was about how when we're recording the unity or the experience of the body, that the act of doing that is part of coming into a place of trust together. And one of the things it made me think of is one of my favorite meeting for businesses ever, at FGC, when something that the body had been working on for a long time came to the floor for decision, and there was a lot of work around getting the words. And when it was approved, like everyone said, approve with so much. And then people stood up and started singing, just spontaneously singing. It was amazing. And it was one of the first big business meetings I'd ever gone to. And it really showed me kind of what the power and experience of business meeting is. But I've also been in business meetings where it's the opposite, where we're starting without a lot of trust. And then the minutes, when they were read back, and almost like exacerbated the lack of trust, because each person's thing wasn't like expressed there, and approving the minutes went on and on and on, because we couldn't come to unity about the minutes because there was no unity in the room to start with. So what do you do then?
I think that that's one of those situations, very much like the situation where one person stands up to stand aside, and then another person stands up, and then another person stands up, where something has gone wrong and needs to be repaired. And that repair may be something that can happen in the face of that meeting, um, between the clerks and the body, to take a step back and say, it seems like we're not hearing each other. Are we in a place to move forward today? It's also a really good place to use worship, to say, let's settle for a minute and just be together and then try again. But it often indicates that there's something deeper happening that really does need to be addressed. And I don't know if you have more to say about that.
Well, I think trust is essential to the Quaker business process succeeding. We need to trust each other. And when trust is broken, it's a tragedy. I think that sometimes we just get carried away and start arguing because we're carried away. And settling into worship can bring us back to a sense that, yes, we really are a community, and we need each other, we value each other. But a community that isn't feeling that we need each other and value each other's spirit, um, it sounds like you have to have a meeting for lamentation or something, simply a time to express the grief that this broken relationship is causing. And maybe the grief would bring people together, but where our normal processes don't.
I see a hand from Rosa, and after that, we're just going to have a couple more minutes before we do our closing worship.
I just wanted to respond to Sarah. My feeling is that the fact that the minutes are read back and then approved by the meeting would take away any legal responsibility from the recording clerk.
Yeah, our minutes
Oh,
are
you're right. Thank you. Thank you.
they are shared documents. And even if we don't necessarily share them publicly all the time or post them publicly, they are essentially public documents. Apart from like minutes of, executive sessions and things like that where confidentiality is needed. Are there any last questions? Sarah?
What was the song that they burst into, Emily? What song was it? Am I thinking right? No, it was Christy.
It was me. Yeah, I don't
Okay.
remember. I don't remember, sadly.
Okay.
That one thing that reminds me of is that I work a lot with my yearly meetings Young Friends program, which is for the high schoolers. And what they do when they reach unity is that they say approved, but they say and draw that out for as long as they possibly can, and then proved. But you hear this kind of harmony of all of them joining together to hold that for as long as they can as part of their approval process. And I offer that as a practice to bring whimsy and joy to your business meetings, and also a sense that we're all in harmony together as we find unity. So, any last thoughts before we go into worship? And let's settle into our closing worship. And thank you so much, friends, for being here. I'm gonna put a link to our document with the outline of what we shared tonight and all of those quotes in the chat. And have a wonderful Friday night.